The bioscanner's insistent chirping pulled Dr. Marcus Chen away from his third cup of synthetic coffee that morning. He'd been hunched over linguistic analysis protocols for the better part of 6 hours, trying to decode the remnants of an alien distress signal the Meridian had intercepted near the Vega system. His neck cracked audibly as he straightened, a sound that would have made his grandmother wince and immediately prescribe some dubious herbal remedy. Dr. Chen to Medical Bay 7. The intercom crackled with Chief Medical Officer Voss's perpetually stressed voice. "We need your expertise with our guest." Marcus rubbed his eyes, which felt like they'd been sandblasted. Guest was a diplomatic way of saying, the unconscious alien we pulled from a deteriorating escape pod 3 days ago. He'd been hoping to avoid this particular consultation until he'd at least figured out the basics of her language structure. But apparently the universe had other plans. The corridors of the Meridian hummed with their usual symphony of life support systems, quantum processors, and the occasional curse from engineering when something inevitably broke down. Marcus had grown fond of these sounds over his 2 years aboard the research vessel. They reminded him that despite being millions of kilometers from Earth, humans were still fundamentally the same. They complained about broken equipment and drank too much coffee. Medical Bay 7 was tucked away in the ship's xenobiology section, a sterile white space that somehow managed to feel both cutting-edge and vaguely uncomfortable. Dr. Voss stood beside a biocontainment field, her silver hair pulled back in its customary bun that looked severe enough to violate several physics laws. "She's been conscious for about an hour," Voss said without preamble. "Vitals are stable, but she won't respond to any of our communication attempts. We tried the universal translator, but it's giving us nothing but static and what I'm pretty sure are recipe suggestions." Marcus peered through the containment field's shimmering barrier. The woman, and she was clearly humanoid enough to use that term, sat on the edge of the medical bed with her back to them. Her most striking feature was immediately apparent. Elongated, pointed ears that extended several inches beyond what any human possessed. Her hair was a deep auburn that caught the medical bay's lighting in an almost ethereal way, falling in waves past her shoulders. "Have you tried the standard greeting protocols?" Marcus asked, pulling up his portable linguistic interface. "Everything in the database. She just sits there and stares at the wall. Occasionally she makes these soft sounds, but the translator can't make sense of them." As if summoned by their conversation, the woman turned toward them. Marcus felt his carefully prepared professional demeanor take a small but noticeable hit. Her face was undeniably beautiful in a way that transcended species. High cheekbones, large eyes that seemed to hold depths of intelligence, and features that managed to be both delicate and strong. But it was the expression of profound loneliness that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. "Let me try," he said, adjusting the containment field to allow audio communication. "Sometimes it's not about the words, but the intent behind them." Marcus activated his interface and began with the most basic xenolinguistic approaches, mathematical concepts, visual patterns, simple tonal variations. The woman watched him with those remarkable eyes, tilting her head at angles that emphasized her unique ears, but showed no sign of comprehension. After 20 minutes of increasingly creative attempts, Marcus was beginning to understand why Voss looked like she wanted to throw something heavy at the nearest wall. He was cycling through emotional resonance patterns when the woman suddenly stood and moved closer to the containment barrier. This close, he could see that her skin had a subtle luminescence, as if lit from within by some internal source. Then she did something that made both doctors step back in surprise. She placed her palm against the containment field, and her eyes began to glow with a soft, blue-white light. The air around her shimmered, and Marcus's linguistic interface started producing readings he'd never seen before. "Fascinating," he murmured, completely absorbed in the data streaming across his screen. The energy patterns suggest some form of telepathic emanation, but there's a structured component that indicates. The woman's glow suddenly intensified, and she stumbled backward, her face contorting with what was unmistakably pain. Her hands flew to her head, covering those distinctive ears, and she made a sound that was part gasp, part sob. "The containment field," Voss shouted. "It's interfering with whatever she's trying to do." Without thinking, Marcus deactivated the barrier and stepped forward. "Hey, it's okay," he said, his voice automatically shifting to the tone he used with frightened animals or his sister's kids when they'd had nightmares. "You're safe here, sweetheart. We're not going to hurt you." The effect was immediate and completely unexpected. The woman's pain seemed to evaporate, replaced by an expression of wonder. Her unique ears flushed with color, a deep rose that spread across her cheeks in a way that was unmistakably a blush. She stared at Marcus with wide eyes and said, in perfectly clear standard, "Say it again." Marcus felt his brain perform what could only be described as a complete system restart. "I'm sorry, what?" "The word you used. The soft word." Her voice had a melodic quality, with subtle harmonics that suggested her vocal cords were structured differently than human ones. "Say it again, please." "Sweetheart," Marcus managed, feeling heat creep up his own neck. Her blush deepened and she actually smiled, the first expression of happiness they'd seen from her. "Yes, that word, it makes colors, warm colors." Dr. Voss cleared her throat loudly, a sound that could have cut through hull plating. "Well, this is medically fascinating and personally awkward. Dr. Chen, perhaps you could explain to our guest that sweetheart is a common human term of endearment and not presumably whatever she thinks it means." Marcus tried to gather his scattered wits. "Right. Yes. Medical consultation, professional behavior." He turned back to the woman, who was still watching him with an expression that made him feel like he was the most interesting thing in several star systems. "I'm Dr. Marcus Chen. That word sweetheart, it's just something humans say when we're trying to be friendly, comforting." "Friendly," she repeated as if testing the concept. "And comforting, these are good things." "Very good things," Marcus confirmed, wondering how someone could be unfamiliar with the concepts of friendship and comfort. "What's your name?" "My designation is Zara, 7 of the 43rd harmonic convergence in the season of dual moons," she said with complete seriousness. Voss blinked. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that? My translator might have hiccuped." "You may call me Zara," the woman said quickly, her ears flickering with embarrassment. "The full designation is ceremonial." "Zara," Marcus said and watched her face light up again. "That's a beautiful name. Can you tell us where you're from? We found you in an escape pod." Something shifted in Zara's expression, the joy fading into something more guarded. There was an accident, my ship was damaged. I do not remember much." Marcus's linguistic training kicked in. She was lying, or at least not telling the complete truth. The slight pause, the way her eyes shifted left, the subtle change in vocal pitch, all classic indicators of deception. But he also recognized the signs of trauma, and pushing too hard too fast was rarely productive. "That's okay," he said gently. "Memory can be affected by trauma. The important thing is that you're safe now." "Safe," she repeated like she was learning a foreign word. "And you are friendly, comforting." "We try to be," Marcus said, shooting a warning glance at Voss, who looked like she was about to launch into a medical questionnaire. "We're explorers, scientists. We study languages and cultures. We're not military." "Scientists," Zara said, her ears perking up with obvious interest. "You seek knowledge." "Constantly," Marcus replied. "Sometimes to the point where we forget to eat or sleep, according to our medical staff." That earned him a withering look from Voss, but Zara actually laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "This is familiar. My people also value knowledge, though we." She trailed off, looking confused. "It's okay," Marcus said quickly. "You don't have to explain everything right now. You've been through something traumatic. Rest is important for recovery." "Rest," Zara nodded. "But first, the soft word, sweetheart, could you? Would it be appropriate to use this word again?" Marcus felt his face heating up again. "Well, it's usually used between people who are close. Friends, family, romantic partners." Romantic, Zara said, her ears flushing that lovely rose color again. This means feelings of affection. Among other things, yes. And if I am not yet your friend, but I would like to be, would the word still be appropriate? Doctor. Voss made a sound that might have been a snort or a suppressed laugh. Marcus shot her another look, then turned back to Zara. I suppose it could be, in a friendly way. Then yes, please. Use the soft word in a friendly way. Marcus cleared his throat, feeling like he was navigating a diplomatic minefield. All right, sweetheart, why don't you rest now? We can talk more later. Zara's entire face lit up like a supernova. Thank you, Marcus, who says soft word. I will rest now and dream of warm colors. As she settled back onto the medical bed, Marcus and Voss retreated to the observation area. Voss waited exactly 30 seconds before turning to him with an expression that could have powered a small starship. Well, that was either the most adorable first contact scenario in the history of xenobiology, or you've just accidentally proposed marriage to an alien woman. I'm honestly not sure which would be worse for the paperwork. Marcus buried his face in his hands. She's clearly from a culture with different social customs. The word probably translates to something completely different in her language. Maybe it indicates social rank or religious significance or maybe she just thinks you're cute, Voss said cheerfully. Those pointed ears aren't the only thing that's different about her biology, you know. Her brain scans show some fascinating neural pathways in the areas associated with emotional processing and social bonding. What are you saying? I'm saying that whatever sweetheart means to her, it's definitely not what it means to us. And judging by her physiological responses, it's something she finds very, very pleasant. Voss grinned. Congratulations, Dr. Chen. You may have just become the first human to accidentally seduce an alien with a term of endearment. Marcus groaned. This is going to be in my report, isn't it? Oh, absolutely. This is the kind of stuff that makes xenobiology interesting. Usually we just catalog different kidney structures and argue about whether something counts as a spleen. Through the observation window, they could see Zara settling into sleep, a small smile still playing around her lips. Her ears had returned to their normal color, but there was something peaceful about her expression that hadn't been there before. She's beautiful, Marcus said quietly, then immediately regretted the admission. Yes, she is, Voss agreed. She's also potentially the first member of a new species we've encountered, which means you, my friend, are about to become very important to this mission. Lucky me, Marcus muttered. Indeed. Now, I suggest you go get some real sleep, because tomorrow you're going to start learning everything there is to know about Zara 7 of the impossibly long name. And something tells me that's going to be more complicated than either of us expects. As Marcus headed back to his quarters, he couldn't shake the image of Zara's face when he'd called her sweetheart, or the way her ears had flushed that soft rose color. Whatever he'd stumbled into, it was definitely going to be more than just a linguistic consultation. Behind him, the medical base systems hummed quietly, monitoring the sleep patterns of their unusual guest. And if the bioscanners had been programmed to detect dreams, they would have registered colors, warm, soft colors that painted themselves across the consciousness of a woman who had never experienced kindness without agenda, or heard a word spoken simply because someone wanted to comfort her. But Marcus didn't know that yet. All he knew was that tomorrow was going to be very interesting indeed. Marcus woke up to his alarm playing what sounded like a dying whale trapped in a synthesizer. He'd programmed it that way deliberately. Nothing quite motivated him to get out of bed like auditory torture. What he hadn't expected was to find a message waiting on his personal comm unit from Captain Rodriguez, asking him to report to her ready room before beginning his cultural consultation sessions with their guest. The captain's ready room was a testament to organized chaos, with stellar charts competing for wall space with family photos, and what appeared to be a collection of exotic coffee mugs from various space stations. Captain Rodriguez herself was a compact woman whose smile could charm hostile alien ambassadors and whose glare could probably stop a meteor. "Sit down, Marcus," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "We need to talk about yesterday's breakthrough. If this is about the sweetheart incident, I can explain." "Oh, I've read Dr. Voss's report. Fascinating stuff. Did you know that when you said that word, our guest's bioelectric field spiked by 300%? The sensors thought she was having some kind of seizure." Rodriguez leaned back in her chair. "What I want to know is whether you think she's telling us the truth about her memory loss." Marcus had spent half the night thinking about the same question. Her linguistic patterns suggest selective omission rather than complete amnesia. She remembers complex concepts like scientific methodology, but claims not to remember basic details about her origin. "It's unusual. Unusual enough to be suspicious. Unusual enough to be protective," Marcus corrected. "I think she's hiding something, but not necessarily from malicious intent, more like survival instinct." Rodriguez nodded. "My thoughts exactly, which is why I'm assigning you as her primary cultural liaison. Help her adjust to life aboard the ship, learn our customs, figure out what makes her tick. And Marcus, try not to accidentally marry her in the process." That was one word, one completely innocent word. That turned her brain into a light show and made her ask you to say it again. Rodriguez's grin was decidedly unsympathetic. "Face it, Doc, you've got a gift." An hour later, Marcus found himself standing outside Medical Base 7 with a data pad full of basic human cultural information and a growing sense that his life had somehow veered into the realm of romantic comedy. Zara was awake, sitting cross-legged on her bed in a standard-issue jumpsuit that somehow managed to look elegant on her. Her ears perked up literally when she saw him. "Marcus, who says soft words?" she said brightly. "You have returned." "Just Marcus is fine," he said, settling into a chair that Dr. Voss had thoughtfully provided. "How are you feeling today?" "I am experiencing many new sensations," Zara replied seriously. "The food dispenser created something called pancakes this morning. They were unexpected. Good unexpected or bad unexpected. They were flat and round and absorbed the liquid called syrup in a most fascinating manner. I believe I understand now why humans consume them with such enthusiasm." Marcus couldn't help but smile. "Wait until you try waffles. They're like pancakes but with built-in syrup storage compartments." Zara's eyes widened. "Humans have engineered their food for maximum efficiency. This is remarkable." "We're very advanced that way," Marcus said solemnly. "Now I'm here to help you learn about human customs and social interactions. Are you interested in that?" "Very much so, but first." Zara hesitated, her ears flickering with what he was learning to recognize as embarrassment. "Could you explain more about the soft words? Yesterday, you mentioned that they were used between people who were close. How does one become close?" Marcus felt heat creeping up his neck again. "Well, usually through shared experiences, common interests, trust, that sort of thing. People become friends by spending time together and getting to know each other. And the romantic feelings you mentioned, that's more complicated." Marcus pulled up his cultural database, grateful for the distraction. "Maybe we should start with basic social structures. On most human worlds, we organize ourselves into family units, friendship groups, professional associations. But what about the romantic feelings?" Zara pressed, leaning forward with an intensity that made her eyes seem to glow slightly. Marcus cleared his throat. "Romance is when two people develop strong emotional and often physical attraction to each other. They enjoy spending time together. They care about each other's well-being. They often use terms of endearment. Like sweetheart. Like sweetheart." Zara nodded thoughtfully. "And this is considered pleasant." "Very pleasant when it's mutual." "Mutual," she repeated, "meaning both people experience these feelings." "Exactly." Zara was quiet for a moment, her head tilted in that characteristic way. "On my world, we do not have this concept. We have different methods of connection." "What kind of methods?" For the first time since he'd met her, Zara looked genuinely uncomfortable. "We share thoughts directly. There is no need for Individual feelings. The collective determines compatibility, assigns partnerships for optimal genetic and social outcomes. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. You mean arranged marriages? Not marriages as you would understand them. More like temporary biological partnerships for specific purposes. When the purpose is fulfilled, the connection is severed. Zara's ears drooped slightly. It is very efficient. But what about choice? What about love? What is love? The question was asked with such genuine curiosity that Marcus found himself completely derailed. How did you explain love to someone who had never experienced it? He found himself thinking about his parents, who still held hands after 30 years of marriage, or his sister's face when she talked about her husband, or the way his grandmother's eyes lit up when she talked about his grandfather, even 5 years after his death. Love is. He started, then stopped. Love is when someone else's happiness becomes essential to your own happiness. When you want to spend time with them not because you have to, but because being with them makes everything better. When you hear their voice and feel warm inside, or when they're sad and you feel sad too. Zara listened with the intensity of someone receiving crucial scientific data. And humans experience this frequently. Some do. Some people fall in love multiple times. Others find one person they want to spend their whole life with. Others prefer the company of friends. There's no single correct way to be human. This is fascinating, Zara said. Your species has developed emotional bonding as an independent choice rather than a collective directive. It must create significant social complications. You have no idea, Marcus laughed. Half of human literature is about the complications of love. The other half is about the complications of not having love. Perhaps you could teach me about these complications, for cultural understanding purposes. There was something in her tone that made Marcus look at her more carefully. Zara, can I ask you something? Yesterday you seemed to recognize the concept of friendship, but now you're talking like emotions are completely foreign to you. Which is it? Zara's ears flushed that telltale rose color. I experience feelings that others of my kind do not. This is why I was traveling alone when you found me. The collective determined that my neural patterns were aberrant. Aberrant how? I generate individual emotional responses rather than simply reflecting the collective's emotional state. I form preferences based on personal experience rather than group consensus. She paused, looking down at her hands. I was told that I was broken. Marcus felt a surge of anger so strong it surprised him. You're not broken, you're just different. Different in a way that makes me unable to fulfill my function in society. Different in a way that makes me dangerous to the stability of the collective mind. Different in a way that required me to be corrected. And instead of being corrected, you ran away. Zara nodded. I stole an escape pod and fled during a routine resource gathering mission. I had hoped to find somewhere I could exist without being a disruption. She looked up at him with those remarkable eyes. When you used the soft word, when you spoke with kindness, I felt something I had never experienced before. I felt valued, for myself, not for my potential utility. Marcus found himself leaning forward without conscious thought. Zara, listen to me. You are not broken. You are not aberrant. You are not dangerous. You're just someone who feels things deeply, and that's not a flaw. But my people, your people are wrong. The words came out more forcefully than he'd intended. I'm sorry, but they are. The ability to form individual emotional connections isn't a defect. It's what makes life worth living. Zara stared at him for a long moment. You truly believe this? I know this. Then perhaps. She hesitated, then seemed to gather her courage. Perhaps you could teach me more about these individual emotional connections. I find myself curious about how they develop. I'd be happy to, Marcus said, and meant it more than he'd expected. Though I should warn you, I'm probably not the best example of human emotional sophistication. I once spent 3 weeks convinced that a coworker was romantically interested in me, because she brought me coffee every morning. only to discover that she was actually just trying to poison me very slowly as part of a practical joke. Zara blinked. She was attempting to poison you. With terrible coffee. It was meant to be funny, but I have very sensitive taste buds, and she apparently had no idea how to brew anything that didn't taste like industrial lubricant. And this was considered humorous. Human humor is complicated too, Marcus admitted. We often find things funny that are actually mildly cruel or embarrassing. It's not very logical. Nothing about your species appears to be very logical, Zara observed. You base major life decisions on emotional responses. You consume recreational toxins. You create artificial food storage systems for maximum syrup absorption efficiency. And you express affection through the use of soft words that make people's faces change color. When you put it that way, we do sound pretty weird. I find it wonderful, Zara said quietly. On my world, everything is logical, everything is efficient, everything serves the greater purpose. But no one has ever called me sweetheart just because they wanted to make me feel better. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. Well, you're stuck with us illogical humans now, so you'd better get used to random acts of kindness. I think I would like that very much, Zara said. And when she smiled, Marcus found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, the universe had a sense of humor after all. 3 days later, Marcus was beginning to suspect that the universe's sense of humor was actually quite malicious. He was currently floating upside down in what used to be the ship's botanical garden, watching a particularly aggressive specimen of Venusian snapweed try to eat his shoe. While Zara clung to a nearby tree branch and giggled like this was the most entertaining thing she'd ever witnessed. "This is not funny," Marcus called out, attempting to right himself in the zero gravity that had suddenly engulfed Deck 7, when the gravity generators decided to have what Chief Engineer Park had cheerfully described as a bit of a moment. "You are spinning," Zara observed, her ears twitching with barely suppressed mirth. "Like a very slow, very dignified washing machine." "I am not spinning like a washing machine." "You are correct. Washing machines are generally more graceful." Marcus managed to grab onto a floating planter and glared at her. "How are you so good at this? Have you been in zero-G before?" "My people evolved on a world with variable gravity fields," Zara explained, executing what could only be described as an elegant zero-gravity pirouette to avoid a cluster of escaped orchids. Natural selection favored those who could adapt quickly to gravitational changes. "Of course it did," Marcus muttered, finally managing to orient himself properly. "Meanwhile, humans evolved on a nice, stable planet where gravity always pointed in the same direction, and plants stayed where you put them." As if summoned by his complaint, a tendril of what appeared to be earth ivy wrapped itself around his ankle. Marcus looked down to discover that the ivy had somehow developed tiny, tooth-like projections along its edges. "Zara, why does the ivy have teeth?" Zara peered down at the offending plant with academic interest. "I believe Dr. Petrov mentioned that some of the specimens were genetically modified for rapid adaptation to new environments. Perhaps it has decided that you are a new environment." "That's not reassuring." "On the positive side, it seems to find you quite habitable." Marcus was about to respond when the lights flickered, and the ship's general alarm began its distinctive three-tone warning. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackled over the intercom, sounding remarkably calm for someone whose ship was apparently falling apart. "All hands, we are experiencing a cascade failure in the gravity generation system. Engineering estimates 47 minutes until full restoration. Please secure yourselves and any loose objects. And would whoever left the botanical bay unsealed please report to my ready room after we get gravity back. We now have carnivorous plants loose in the ventilation system." "Carnivorous plants?" Marcus asked weakly. "Dr. Petrov's experiments have been ambitious," Zara said diplomatically, "though I believe the correct term is omnivorous. They appear to enjoy both plant and animal matter." "That's worse. Only if you are made of organic compounds." I am made of organic compounds. Then perhaps we should focus on reaching the emergency station before the plants become more motivated. The emergency station was located on the far side of the botanical bay, past what was now a floating jungle of increasingly active plant life. Marcus watched a cluster of cherry tomatoes drift past, their vines writhing in a way that tomatoes definitely should not writhe. I don't suppose your people developed any useful plant management techniques along with the gravity adaptation, he asked hopefully. We learned to run very quickly. Not helpful in zero gravity. No, but we also learned to think creatively under pressure. Zara pointed toward a section of the bay where the emergency station's red beacon was visible through a tangle of floating vegetation. There. We need to reach that beacon. Right, simple enough. Just navigate through a zero-gravity obstacle course of genetically modified plants that want to eat us. When you phrase it that way, it does sound challenging. Marcus pushed off from his planter, aiming for a clear patch of space near the center of the bay. He made it approximately 3 meters before a hanging vine snagged his shoulder and spun him off course toward what appeared to be a very large, very purple flower with an unsettling number of stamens. Zara, help! She launched herself from her tree branch with a grace that made Marcus feel even more like a flailing amateur. In one fluid motion, she caught his arm, redirected his trajectory, and somehow managed to make the whole thing look like an elaborate dance move. Thank you, Marcus gasped as they drifted toward a relatively safe area near the viewing port. You are most welcome, sweetheart. The word hit him like a small but pleasant electric shock. Did you just use the soft word in return? Yes, was this inappropriate? Marcus found himself grinning despite their predicament. No, it was perfect timing actually. I am learning that humans often use affectionate terms during stressful situations. Is this a survival mechanism? Something like that. Marcus looked around for their next handhold. Although usually the stress involves things like deadlines or traffic, not flying carnivorous vegetation. Your species leads remarkably sheltered lives. We like it that way. They were making good progress toward the emergency station when the lights flickered again, and the bay's environmental systems made a sound like a very large, very tired whale. Suddenly, every plant in the bay began glowing with a soft, pulsing light. That's new, Marcus observed. The bioluminescence is likely a response to the electrical fluctuations, Zara said, though she sounded less certain than usual. Many plants use light as a communication method. Communication, what are they saying? As if in answer to his question, the plant's glow intensified, and Marcus could swear he heard something that sounded almost like music. A low harmonic humming that seemed to resonate in his bones. Zara, are you hearing this? But when he turned to look at her, he found her floating motionless, her eyes wide and unfocused, her ears glowing with the same soft light as the plants. Zara, he reached for her hand, and the moment their skin made contact, the humming sound exploded into a symphony of sensation that bypassed his ears entirely and went straight to his brain. Joy, curiosity, hunger, growth, warmth, connection, life. The concepts flooded his mind in a rush of emotion and imagery that had nothing to do with words. For a moment, he could feel what the plants felt, the simple contentment of growth, the satisfaction of nutrients absorbed, the pleasure of light and warmth and the company of other living things. And underneath it all, something else. Something that felt like recognition, like greeting, like friend, protector, safe, warm, word, giver, bonded. Marcus jerked his hand back, and the sensation cut off abruptly. Zara blinked and seemed to come back to herself, her ears returning to their normal color. What just happened? Marcus asked, his voice slightly hoarse. I think the plants were trying to communicate with us, with me. Zara looked around at the still glowing vegetation with wonder. They were curious about us, about you specifically. About me. They could sense the connection between us, the emotional resonance. Zara's ears flushed pink. They think we are bonded. Bonded, paired, mated, joined in purpose and affection. Marcus felt his face heating up. And what did you tell them? Nothing. I was too surprised to respond coherently, but I believe they interpreted our proximity and mutual concern as confirmation of their assumption. So the plants think we're a couple. The plants think we are life partners engaged in a cooperative survival effort with strong emotional underpinnings. That's a very academic way of saying the plants think we're a couple. I am attempting to maintain scientific objectivity in what appears to be a highly subjective situation. Marcus looked around at the glowing garden, where the plants had resumed their gentle humming and seemed to be settling down. The aggressive vines had relaxed, the carnivorous flowers had closed their petals, and even the modified ivy had released his ankle. "I think they're trying to help us," he said slowly. "Look, they've cleared a path to the emergency station." Sure enough, the floating vegetation had arranged itself into something resembling a corridor, leaving clear space for them to navigate toward their destination. "They believe we are bonded, so they are facilitating our survival," Zara said thoughtfully. "This is actually quite logical behavior for a collective plant intelligence." Collective plant intelligence, right. Because that's a normal thing to encounter on a Tuesday. Is it not? Zara, sweetheart, most humans go their entire lives without encountering any kind of plant intelligence, collective or otherwise. The endearment slipped out naturally, and Marcus realized he was getting used to the way Zara's face lit up when he said it. What was more concerning was how much he enjoyed making her face light up. "Then you are quite fortunate to be experiencing so many unusual things," Zara said, as they made their way through the plant-created corridor. "Though I suspect your life was already quite interesting before you encountered me." "Not this interesting. Before I met you, my biggest excitement was discovering a new grammatical structure in an ancient text. Now I'm floating through space gardens while telepathic plants play matchmaker." "Matchmaker?" "Someone who tries to bring people together romantically." "Ah, then yes, they are definitely playing matchmaker." They reached the emergency station, just as the gravity generators hummed back to life. Marcus felt his stomach drop as they both fell ungracefully to the deck, landing in a tangle of limbs that would have been embarrassing under normal circumstances, and was mortifying when surrounded by an audience of apparently sentient plant life. "Sorry," Marcus mumbled, realizing he was lying partially on top of Zara, his face approximately 6 inches from hers. "For what?" she asked, her voice slightly breathless. "For this." He gestured vaguely at their current position. "I do not mind," Zara said quietly. "Your proximity is pleasant." Marcus found himself staring into those remarkable eyes, noting the subtle gold flecks that seemed to swirl like tiny galaxies. Her lips were slightly parted, and he was suddenly very aware of the fact that she smelled like something between cinnamon and starlight. The moment stretched between them, filled with possibility and the soft humming of very pleased plants, until the intercom crackled back to life. "Dr. Chen, please report to the bridge. We have a situation that requires your expertise." Marcus sighed and carefully disentangled himself from Zara, helping her to her feet. "Duty calls." "Will I see you later?" Zara asked, and there was something almost shy in her voice. "Absolutely. We still have a lot more human customs to cover." "I look forward to it, sweetheart." As Marcus made his way to the bridge, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed in the botanical bay. Not just between him and Zara, but in his understanding of what was possible in the universe. If plants could form collective intelligence, if emotions could resonate across species lines, if an alien woman could learn to love through the simple gift of a kind word, well, maybe the universe's sense of humor wasn't so malicious after all. The bridge was in what Marcus had learned to recognize as controlled chaos mode when he arrived. Captain Rodriguez stood at the center of it all, looking like she was conducting an orchestra of controlled disasters. Navigation Officer Torres was hunched over sensor readings that apparently showed something interesting enough to make him mutter creative curses in 3 languages, while Communications Specialist Kim kept adjusting her headset with the frustrated expression of someone trying to tune in a radio station during a solar storm. Marcus' perfect timing, Rodriguez called out without turning around. "We've got company, and they're asking for our guest by name." Marcus felt his stomach drop somewhere around his boots. "What kind of company?" "The kind that travels in ships approximately 10 times the size of ours, and has been broadcasting what our translator is calling formal demands for the return of stolen property for the past 20 minutes. Stolen property. One missing person. Designation Zara, 7 of the 43rd harmonic convergence in the season of dual moons. They seem quite eager to have her back." Marcus looked at the main view screen, where a ship that could generously be described as imposing hung in space like a metallic whale. Its surface was smooth and reflective, with no visible weapons ports or defensive systems, but something about it radiated menace in the way that sharks radiated menace, not through obvious threat, but through the quiet confidence of an apex predator. "Have you told Zara about this?" "Not yet. I wanted to get your assessment first. What's your professional opinion about her likelihood of wanting to go home?" Marcus thought about Zara's face when she talked about being corrected, about the way she described her people's collective mind and arranged partnerships. "I think she'd rather take her chances with carnivorous plants." "That's what I was afraid of. Kim, open a channel to the alien vessel." The main screen shifted to show what appeared to be a conference room filled with beings who looked remarkably like Zara, except for their eyes. Where Zara's eyes held warmth and curiosity and the capacity for wonder, these beings had eyes like still water, reflective, calm, and utterly empty of individual personality. The central figure, distinguished by slightly more elaborate clothing and ears that bore geometric tattoos, spoke in a voice that carried no emotional inflection whatsoever. "I am Primary Coordinator Vex, one of the 9th Administrative Conclave. You are harboring a defective unit that belongs to our collective. Return Zara 7 immediately for necessary corrective measures." Rodriguez stepped forward with the diplomatic smile that had successfully prevented 3 interstellar incidents and 1 very awkward first contact situation involving nudist aliens who considered clothing a mortal insult. "I'm Captain Rodriguez of the research vessel Meridian. Zara 7 is currently recovering from injuries sustained when we found her in a damaged escape pod. As soon as our medical staff clears her for travel, we'll be happy to discuss her return." Medical clearance is irrelevant. Zara 7 is property of the collective and will be retrieved regardless of her physical condition. Her defective neural patterns require immediate correction before they can contaminate other units. Marcus felt anger spike through his chest. She's not property and she's not defective. The aliens on the screen turned their collective attention to him with the synchronization of a school of fish changing direction. It was deeply unsettling. "You are the human who has been interfacing with the defective unit," Vex once said. "Your emotional resonance patterns have been detected in proximity to Zara 7. This contamination has accelerated her deterioration." "I'm sorry, contamination. Individual emotional responses are a mental illness that spreads through direct contact with infected individuals. Your species appears to be chronically infected with this condition." Rodriguez stepped smoothly between Marcus and the screen before he could say something diplomatically unfortunate. "Perhaps we could arrange a meeting to discuss this situation in person. I'm sure we can find a mutually acceptable solution." "There is only one acceptable solution. Return Zara 7 within 6 standard hours, or we will retrieve her by force." The communication cut off, leaving the bridge in tense silence broken only by the gentle hum of life support systems and Tor's creative multilingual cursing. "Well," Rodriguez said finally, "that could have gone better." "They think emotions are contagious," Marcus said, still processing what he'd heard. "They think I've infected Zara with feelings. And apparently they think that's bad enough to justify military action," Rodriguez replied grimly. "Kim, get me a complete scan of that ship. I want to know what we're dealing with. Tors, plot a course to the nearest Federation outpost, just in case we need to run very quickly." Captain, Marcus said slowly, I need to talk to Zara. She needs to know what's happening. Agreed, but Marcus, don't make any promises we can't keep. Marcus found Zara in the observation lounge, staring out at the stars with an expression of profound melancholy. She turned when she heard him enter, and her face immediately brightened in a way that made his chest feel tight. Marcus, I was hoping you would visit. I have been practicing human emotional expressions. Observe. She arranged her features into what was clearly meant to be a smile, but looked more like someone trying to solve a complex mathematical equation. How was that? Terrifying, Marcus said honestly. But don't worry, emotional expressions take practice. I see. Perhaps you could demonstrate the correct technique. Zara, we need to talk. Your people are here. The effect was immediate and devastating. The light went out of her eyes, her ears drooped, and she seemed to fold in on herself like a flower closing against a cold wind. How long do I have? She asked quietly. They want you back within 6 hours. And you will give me to them. It wasn't a question, and the resignation in her voice made Marcus want to punch something. We don't want to give you to anyone, but they have a very large ship and some very specific threats about taking you by force. Zara nodded slowly. Of course, they cannot allow me to remain free. My neural patterns are too dangerous to the stability of the collective. Dangerous how? Individual thought is like a virus to my people. If one person begins to question the collective's decisions, to form personal preferences, to develop emotional attachments, others might follow. Eventually, the entire social structure could collapse into chaos. You mean it could collapse into people making their own choices about their lives? Yes, chaos. Zara's ears flushed slightly. Though I am beginning to understand that what my people call chaos, you might call freedom. Marcus moved to sit beside her on the observation lounge's comfortable bench. Zara, what would happen if you went back? They would perform a neural realignment procedure. It is unpleasant but effective. Afterward, I would no longer experience individual thoughts or emotions. I would be a proper member of the collective again. And if you refused, then they would perform the procedure anyway, but with additional modifications to ensure compliance. I would become what you might call a drone, capable of following instructions but incapable of independent action. Marcus felt sick. There has to be another option. There is. Zara turned to look at him, and there was something new in her expression, not hope exactly, but determination. I could ask for asylum with your people. Would that work? I do not know. My people have no concept of individual rights or political asylum. They would likely view any attempt to harbor me as theft of collective property. Well, then we'll just have to convince them otherwise. Marcus, sweetheart, Zara said gently, you cannot fight an entire civilization to protect one defective person. First of all, you're not defective. Second of all, watch me. Zara stared at him for a long moment. You would truly risk conflict with my people to protect me. Absolutely. But why? You have known me for only a few days. By your own species standards, we barely qualify as friends. Marcus realized he was at a crossroads. He could give her a rational answer about human rights and the Federation's policies on political asylum. He could talk about the scientific value of cultural exchange and the importance of protecting unique individuals. He could make it about principle and duty and all the noble reasons that would sound good in an official report. Instead, he found himself telling her the truth. Because when I call you sweetheart, you light up like you've never heard anything so wonderful in your life. Because you think waffles are a marvel of engineering, and you find joy in watching humans do ridiculous things like spin around in zero gravity. Because you're brave enough to run away from everything you've ever known, rather than let them take away what makes you who you are. He paused, then added quietly, and because the idea of them turning you into someone who can't feel happiness makes me want to declare war on the entire universe. Zara was very still for a moment. Then, to his complete surprise, she started to laugh. Not the gentle wind chime sound he was used to, but real, helpless laughter that made her eyes water and her ears flush pink. I'm sorry, Marcus said, confused. I didn't mean to be funny. You are not funny, Zara gasped, still laughing. You are wonderful and ridiculous and completely impossible, and I think I am beginning to understand why humans write so much literature about the complications of love. Oh, Marcus said, and felt his world tilt slightly on its axis. Oh. Yes, oh, Zara said, wiping her eyes. Marcus, I need to tell you something important about my people's neural realignment procedure. What about it? It does not simply remove individual thought and emotion. It removes the capacity for individual thought and emotion. Once the procedure is performed, the person I am now will cease to exist entirely. The body will remain, but the consciousness, the personality, everything that makes me me will be gone. Marcus felt cold. You're talking about murder. I am talking about correction, Zara said matter-of-factly. From my people's perspective, individual consciousness is already a form of death, death of the collective self. And from your perspective, from my perspective, I would rather die as myself than live as someone else wearing my face. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the stars and the ominous bulk of the alien ship hanging between them and infinity. So, Marcus said finally, I guess we're going to find out how good Captain Rodriguez is at diplomatic miracles. And if diplomatic miracles fail, Marcus thought about the plants in the botanical bay, about the way they'd responded to the emotional connection between him and Zara. He thought about the Federation's policies on individual rights and the crew of the Meridian, who had already started referring to Zara as one of ours. He thought about the vast, cold universe and the small, warm woman sitting beside him, who had learned to love through the simple gift of a kind word. Then we'll just have to get creative, he said. After all, you did mention that your people learn to think creatively under pressure. That was actually your people I was referring to. Even better, we're very good at impossible things when properly motivated. And what exactly motivates you in this situation? Marcus looked at her, at the way the starlight caught in her eyes and made her ears glow softly at the edges, at the small smile playing around her lips despite everything they were facing. You do, sweetheart, you do. 4 hours later, Marcus was beginning to think that getting creative might have been overly optimistic. The emergency meeting in Conference Room Alpha had devolved into what could charitably be called controlled pandemonium, and what Marcus privately thought of as the worst brainstorming session in the history of interstellar diplomacy. We could hide her in the cargo bay, suggested Engineer Park, who apparently approached alien standoffs the same way she approached mechanical problems, with enthusiasm and a concerning disregard for safety protocols. They have scanners, Chief Security Officer Williams pointed out dryly. Sophisticated ones. They'd find her in approximately 30 seconds. What if we disguise her as a human? Offered Dr. Voss. A little cosmetic surgery on the ears, some makeup. They're not looking for her appearance, Marcus interrupted. They're tracking her neural patterns. Her brain activity is apparently unique enough to identify from a distance. Well, that's inconvenient, Park said cheerfully. What about a neural dampening field? We could mask her brain waves. With what? Williams asked. Our medical bay doesn't exactly stock anti-telepathy equipment. Captain Rodriguez, who had been listening to the increasingly ridiculous suggestions with the patience of someone accustomed to managing creative but impractical people, finally raised her hand for silence. Before we start planning elaborate heists involving fake identities and experimental brain surgery, has anyone considered simply asking Zara what she thinks we should do? The room fell silent. Marcus felt heat creep up his neck. I should have thought of that. Yes, you should have, Rodriguez said, not unkindly. You're so busy trying to save her that you forgot she might have opinions about her own rescue. 15 minutes later, they had reconvened with Zara present. She sat at the conference table looking remarkably calm for someone whose former people wanted to forcibly reprogram her brain, while the human crew members around her radiated various levels of protective anxiety. So, Rodriguez said, Zara, we've been discussing options for keeping you safe from your peoples. Corrective procedures. Do you have any insights that might help us? Zara tilted her head thoughtfully. Are you familiar with the concept of malicious compliance? I'm sorry, what? It is a term I learned from Dr. Chen's cultural database. The practice of following instructions in a way that achieves the letter of the law while completely subverting its spirit. Marcus blinked. You want to use malicious compliance against a collective alien intelligence? Precisely. My people demanded the return of Zara 7 of the 43rd harmonic convergence in the season of dual moons. They did not specify that she needed to be in any particular mental state when returned. I'm not following, Rodriguez said slowly. What if, Zara said with a small smile that was absolutely diabolical, Zara 7 were to undergo a voluntary neural modification that fundamentally altered her brain patterns? She would still be Zara 7, technically, but her neural signature would be completely different. My people would receive exactly what they asked for, but not what they actually wanted. The room erupted in confused voices, but Marcus felt a grin spreading across his face. You want to fake your own neural death. I want to commit actual neural death in a very specific and reversible way. Dr. Voss, is it possible to temporarily suppress higher brain functions while maintaining basic life support? Dr. Voss looked like someone had just asked her to perform surgery with a spoon. Theoretically, yes. We could induce a controlled coma state that would effectively flatline your neural activity. But Zara, that's incredibly dangerous. If something went wrong, I would be dead, which is preferable to being corrected. But how would that help? Williams asked. They just wait for you to wake up and then correct you anyway. Not if I never woke up as the same person, Zara said. Marcus, your people have a saying about desperate times, do they not? Desperate times call for desperate measures, Marcus said slowly, beginning to see where she was going with this. Exactly. What if Zara 7 died during the procedure but someone else entirely woke up? Someone with completely different neural patterns, different memories, different personality markers. Park leaned forward with interest. You want to fake amnesia. I want to fake complete psychological reconstruction. When I wake up, I will be a blank slate that happens to be wearing Zara 7 body. My people will have no choice but to accept that their property has been fundamentally damaged beyond repair. And then what? Rodriguez asked. Then they would be forced to abandon me as a total loss. After all, you cannot correct what no longer exists. Marcus stared at her. Zara, you're talking about erasing yourself. I am talking about temporarily erasing myself in order to permanently preserve myself. The neural patterns that make me who I am would be safely stored in your medical computers during the procedure. When my people leave, Dr. Voss could restore my original patterns. Could she, though? Marcus looked at Voss, who was rapidly cycling through expressions of fascination, horror, and professional curiosity. It's theoretically possible, Voss said slowly. We'd essentially be creating a complete neural backup, wiping the original, then restoring from backup. But the risks are enormous. Neural pattern storage is still experimental technology. If something went wrong with the backup, if there was data corruption, if the restoration process failed, I would truly die, Zara finished calmly. Yes, I understand the risks. No, Marcus said immediately. Absolutely not. We'll find another way. Marcus, sweetheart, Zara said gently, there is no other way. My people will not be negotiated with, they cannot be fought successfully, and they will not simply give up. This is the only option that gives us a chance. It's insane. It is creative thinking under pressure. You said humans were very good at impossible things when properly motivated. I didn't mean you should risk your life. I am risking my life to save my life. This is logically consistent. Marcus looked around the table for support, but found the other crew members looking thoughtful rather than horrified. You're all actually considering this. It's not the craziest plan we've ever attempted, Park said cheerfully. Remember the time we convinced those space pirates that we were a religious vessel by playing Christmas carols at high volume? That's not remotely the same thing. You're right, Williams said. This plan might actually work. Dr. Voss, Rodriguez said, what would you need to make this happen? Time to set up the neural storage equipment, a very steady hand and probably several drinks afterward, Voss replied. Also, we'd need to make the procedure look convincing to external observers. Zara's people would be monitoring her vital signs. Actually, Zara said, they would be monitoring my neural resonance patterns, if those patterns simply stopped. During what appeared to be a medical emergency, they would assume that the stress of capture had caused a complete psychological breakdown, which happens frequently with defective units. Marcus asked, hating the terminology but recognizing its importance. More frequently than my people care to admit, individual consciousness is apparently quite fragile when subjected to forced reintegration procedures. So your people have seen this before, Rodriguez said slowly. Neural collapse during attempted correction. It is considered an unfortunate but acceptable side effect of the process. They would not be surprised, merely disappointed at the waste of biological resources. Marcus felt sick. They're really willing to just throw you away. Marcus, they were willing to throw me away when I was fully functional. This would simply make the disposal more convenient for them. Right, Rodriguez said, standing up. Dr. Voss, how long do you need to prepare? 2 hours minimum. Possibly 3 if I want to do this, without accidentally lobotomizing our patient. I would prefer not to be lobotomized, Zara said seriously. It sounds unpleasant. You'd be unconscious, Voss pointed out. I would still find the concept philosophically objectionable. Take the 3 hours, Rodriguez told Voss. Zara, are you absolutely certain about this? Captain, I have been certain about very few things in my life. I was certain that I did not wish to be corrected, certain that I wanted to escape my people's collective, and certain that Marcus has the most beautiful eyes I have ever seen. This plan feels equally certain. Marcus choked on his own breathing. I'm sorry, what was that middle part? The part about escaping the collective. No, the other middle part. Zara's ears flushed pink. Perhaps we could discuss my aesthetic observations at a later time. We appear to have a schedule to maintain. Right, Marcus said weakly. Schedule, neural backup, possible death, the usual Tuesday activities. Marcus, Zara said, reaching across the table to take his hand. If this procedure fails, I want you to know that these past few days have been the happiest of my life. You taught me what it means to be valued for who I am rather than what I can provide. That is a gift beyond measure. Don't talk like this is goodbye, Marcus said, squeezing her hand. You're going to wake up, and you're going to remember everything. And we're going to teach you about human literature and terrible movies, and why humans put pineapple on pizza despite it being obviously wrong. Pineapple on pizza is not wrong, Park protested. It's sweet and tangy and... Not now, Park, Rodriguez said firmly. Zara will begin preparations immediately. Try to rest if you can. I will attempt to rest, Zara agreed. Though I suspect I will spend the time practicing being unconscious. Is there a proper technique? Just don't think too hard about it, Marcus said. The unconscious part tends to handle itself. This seems counterintuitive, but I will trust your expertise in the matter. As the meeting broke up and the crew dispersed to their various preparations, Marcus found himself alone with Zara in the conference room. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, hands still linked across the table. Marcus, Zara said quietly, if something goes wrong, will you remember me as I am now? Not as Zara, 7 of the impossible designation, but as someone who learned to love because a kind human called her sweetheart. Nothing is going to go wrong, Marcus said firmly. But yes, I'll remember you exactly as you are. Good. And Marcus, yes, when I wake up and remember everything, would it be appropriate to tell you that I love you? Or should I wait for a more convenient time? Marcus stared at her, feeling his heart perform several impossible acrobatic maneuvers. I think, he said carefully, that would be very appropriate timing. Excellent. I shall put it on my post-neural restoration agenda. Right after remember how to breathe and verify that all major personality components are intact. Very organized of you. I am learning to appreciate human efficiency standards. Marcus laughed, despite everything. Zara, sweetheart, when this is all over, we are going to have the most ridiculous conversation about feelings in the history of interspecies relations. I look forward to it immensely, Zara said, and smiled like someone who had already won. 3 hours and 17 minutes later, Marcus stood in Medical Bay 7 watching Dr. Voss make final adjustments to equipment that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie's idea of a mad scientist's laboratory. Neural storage matrices hummed quietly next to biomonitors that displayed readouts he didn't want to understand, while Zara lay on the medical bed looking remarkably serene for someone about to voluntarily flatline her own brain. Last chance to reconsider this monumentally stupid plan, Marcus said, though his heart wasn't really in the protest anymore. I appreciate your concern, but I remain committed to my monumentally stupid plan, Zara replied. Besides, it is too late for alternatives. My people's ship has begun broadcasting increasingly impatient demands for my return. Through the Medical Bay speakers, Captain Rodriguez's voice carried the latest update from the bridge. Zara, they're giving us 1 final hour before they start what they're calling retrieval protocols. I'm not sure what that means, but it doesn't sound pleasant. It means they will attempt to beam me directly from your ship to theirs, Zara said calmly. The process is somewhat traumatic for the individual being retrieved, but my people consider minor cellular damage an acceptable cost for efficiency. Minor cellular damage. Dr. Voss looked up from her equipment with alarm. What kind of minor cellular damage? Nothing fatal, merely painful, and occasionally results in temporary memory loss, muscle spasms, or spontaneous combustion. Spontaneous combustion is not minor, Marcus protested. It is very minor if you survive it, Zara pointed out reasonably. That's technically true but also completely insane. Marcus, sweetheart, I believe we have established that insanity is a recurring theme in our relationship. Dr. Voss cleared her throat. Speaking of insanity, we're ready to begin the procedure. Zara, are you absolutely certain about this? Dr. Voss, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Well, except for my certainty that Marcus has beautiful eyes. But that is a different category of certainty entirely. Marcus felt his face heating up. Could we maybe focus on the life-threatening medical procedure instead of my allegedly beautiful eyes? They are not allegedly beautiful, Zara said seriously. They are empirically beautiful. I have conducted extensive observational research. Extensive observational research. I have been staring at them for 3 days. This constitutes a thorough scientific study. Okay, you too, Dr. Voss interrupted. We can discuss Marcus's ocular aesthetics after we fake Zara's neural death. Zara, I need you to count backward from 10 as the anesthetic takes effect. 10, Zara said, her eyes fixed on Marcus. 9, 8. Marcus, if I do not remember you when I wake up, please remind me that I think you are wonderful. 7, 6. Also remind me about waffles. 5. They are apparently marvels of engineering. 4, 3. I love you, Marcus Chen. 2. Her eyes fluttered closed, and the biomonitors shifted to display the steady rhythms of deep unconsciousness. Marcus found himself holding his breath as Dr. Voss began the delicate process of mapping and storing Zara's neural patterns. Neural scan complete, Voss announced after what felt like several years, but was probably only 20 minutes. Beginning pattern storage now. The neural storage matrix came alive with swirling patterns of light that somehow seemed both beautiful and terrifying. Marcus watched what was essentially Zara's consciousness being translated into streams of data, and tried not to think about how many ways this could go catastrophically wrong. Storage complete, beginning neural suppression sequence. The biomonitors began showing dramatic changes as Zara's higher brain functions systematically shut down. Her neural activity dropped to barely detectable levels, and the readings that had shown the unique patterns of her individual consciousness flatlined into the steady, empty rhythms of a mind that was no longer truly present. Jesus, Marcus whispered. Neural suppression complete, Dr. Voss said quietly. As far as any external scanner is concerned, Zara 7 has just experienced complete psychological collapse. Her body is alive, but her mind is essentially gone. On cue, the intercom crackled with Captain Rodriguez's voice. Medical Bay were being scanned by the alien vessel. There. Oh my. They're requesting immediate transport of Zara's body to their ship for disposal. Marcus felt his stomach clench. Disposal. They consider her a total loss, came Rodriguez's reply. Apparently, neural collapse during stress makes the biological unit unsuitable for any purpose, including correction. They want to collect the body for what they're calling organic recycling. That's horrible, Dr. Voss muttered. That's perfect, Marcus said grimly. They don't want to fix her anymore. They just want to throw her away. We're going to allow the transport, Rodriguez continued. Voss, how long before you can safely attempt restoration? I need at least 6 hours to ensure the neural pathways are stable enough for pattern reintegration, Voss replied. Any sooner and we risk permanent damage. Understood. Prepare for transport in 60 seconds. Marcus looked down at Zara's peaceful face, her distinctive ears now pale and lifeless looking. This is insane. Completely insane, Dr. Voss agreed. Also brilliant if it works. And if it doesn't work, then we'll have learned something valuable about the limits of neural storage technology. That's not comforting. It wasn't meant to be. The transport beam engaged with a sound like singing crystal, and Zara's body dissolved into sparkling light. Marcus stared at the empty medical bed, feeling like a piece of his chest had just been carved out with a rusty spoon. She's gone, he said stupidly. Temporarily, Dr. Voss corrected. Her consciousness is right here. She gestured to the neural storage matrix, where patterns of light continued to swirl in complex, mesmerizing configurations. All we have to do is wait for her people to leave, then put her back where she belongs. 6 hours and 43 minutes later, Marcus was pacing the length of Medical Bay 7 for approximately the 1,000th time when Captain Rodriguez's voice announced the moment they'd all been waiting for. The alien vessel is departing. They've dumped Zara's body in an escape pod and launched it toward the nearest star. Apparently, organic recycling involves stellar incineration. Cheerful people, Doctor. Voss commented, making final preparations for the restoration procedure. Marcus, we retrieved the pod as soon as they left. Zara's body is in perfect condition, and her brain activity is exactly where we need it for neural reintegration. Are you sure this is going to work? No, but I'm reasonably optimistic about our chances. Reasonably optimistic. Maybe 60-40 in favor of success. 60-40, that's terrible odds. Actually, for experimental neural surgery involving alien physiology, 60-40 is practically a guarantee. Marcus resumed pacing. I hate this. I hate everything about this. You could wait outside, Doctor. Voss suggested gently. No, if something goes wrong, I want to be here. And if something goes right, then I want to be here for that too. Dr. Voss smiled and began the restoration sequence. Beginning neural pattern reintegration. This is going to take about 20 minutes, so try not to wear a hole in my nice clean floor. Marcus watched the neural storage matrix begin transferring its precious cargo back to Zara's waiting brain. The process looked even more complex in reverse, with streams of light and data flowing in intricate patterns that hurt to look at directly. Neural pathways responding normally, Dr. Voss reported. Memory centers accepting pattern integration. Personality matrices coming online. So far, so good. How will we know if it worked? Well, if she wakes up and remembers who you are, that's a good sign. If she wakes up and thinks she's a houseplant, that's less encouraging. Could she actually think she's a houseplant? Probably not. More likely she'd experience some form of amnesia or personality fragmentation. But neural restoration is an art as much as a science. We won't know what we've got until she wakes up. The biomonitors began showing increased activity as Zara's brain patterns grew more complex and individual. Marcus held his breath as consciousness slowly returned to the woman who had stolen his heart with a simple request to hear a soft word again. Zara's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. She blinked several times, then turned her head to look around the medical bay with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Zara," Marcus said quietly, "how do you feel?" She stared at him for a long moment, and Marcus felt his heart sink as he saw no recognition in her eyes. Then, slowly, she smiled. "I feel like someone who has just experienced a very strange dream about being unconscious," she said, and Marcus nearly collapsed with relief. "Also, I remember you promising me a ridiculous conversation about feelings." "You remember," Marcus said, feeling tears he hadn't expected sting his eyes. "I remember everything, sweetheart. The plants, the zero gravity, the way you called me sweetheart and made me feel like the most important person in several star systems." She struggled to sit up, and Marcus immediately moved to help her. "Did our monumentally stupid plan work?" "Perfectly," Dr. Voss announced. "Your people think you're dead, your neural patterns are completely intact, and you're officially free to make your own choices about your life." "Excellent. In that case, I choose to tell Marcus that I love him." Marcus felt his world tilt again, but this time in the best possible way. "I love you too, Zara. More than I probably should after knowing you for less than a week." "Time is relative," Zara said seriously. "Besides, I conducted extensive observational research. The eye-staring research, among other things. I also observed that you are kind to people who are afraid, that you risk yourself to protect others, and that you believe in impossible things when properly motivated. These are excellent qualities in a potential romantic partner." "Potential? Well, I assume we should follow proper human courtship protocols. I am still learning your customs." Marcus laughed, feeling lighter than he had in days. "I think we can skip ahead in the protocol a bit. After all, you did technically die for love. That's usually reserved for the dramatic climax of the relationship. Then what comes after the dramatic climax?" "The part where we figure out how to live happily ever after." "I would like that very much," Zara said, and when she smiled, Marcus thought that maybe the universe's sense of humor was actually quite benevolent after all. 6 months later, Marcus stood in the ship's botanical garden, which had been transformed into something resembling a wedding venue by enthusiastic crew members and increasingly sophisticated plant life. The Venusian snapweeds had learned to arrange themselves into decorative patterns. The modified ivy had developed the ability to produce flowers on command, and the cherry tomatoes had somehow taught themselves to glow in rhythm with music. "You realize," Captain Rodriguez said, adjusting her formal uniform, "that I'm about to perform the first recorded interspecies marriage in Federation history." "No pressure," Marcus replied, tugging at his collar nervously. "Actually, that's not entirely accurate," Dr. Voss interjected from her position as unofficial wedding photographer. "There was that incident with the Deltan ambassador and the human trade representative, but nobody talks about it because the paperwork was a nightmare." "Much more pressure," Marcus corrected. "Oh, stop worrying," Engineer Park called out from where she was making final adjustments to the ceremonial arch she'd constructed out of spare parts and sheer enthusiasm. "What's the worst that could happen? The plants could achieve sentience and object to the proceedings," Marcus suggested. On cue, the assembled vegetation rustled in what sounded distinctly like laughter. "I think they approve," Zara said, appearing at his side in a dress that Dr. Voss had somehow constructed out of fabric that seemed to shimmer with its own internal light. Her ears were decorated with small flowers that the garden's plants had apparently voted to provide, and she looked so beautiful that Marcus temporarily forgot how to breathe. "You look incredible," he managed. "You look nervous," she replied, taking his hand. "Are you having second thoughts about marrying an alien woman who technically doesn't exist according to her own people?" "Are you kidding?" I'm marrying someone who learned to love through the power of a single kind word, who taught plants to play matchmaker, and who was brave enough to die and come back to life for the chance at happiness. I'm not nervous. I'm terrified I'm going to wake up and discover this was all an elaborate dream. If it is a dream, it is a lovely one, Zara said, and kissed him softly while the plants hummed approval and the crew of the Meridian applauded. Later, after the ceremony and the celebration and the speeches that somehow managed to be both heartfelt and scientifically accurate, Marcus and Zara stood together at the observation deck, watching stars wheel past in the ancient dance of the cosmos. "Do you ever regret it?" Marcus asked quietly. "Giving up everything you knew for an uncertain future with a bunch of chaotic humans?" "Marcus, sweetheart," Zara said, leaning against his side, "I did not give up everything I knew. I gave up everything I was told to know. What I actually knew, what I learned here, with you, is that love is not efficient or logical or easily categorized. It is messy and complicated and absolutely essential." Very philosophical for someone who used to think emotions were a form of mental illness. "I have had excellent teachers in the art of being human." "And what have you learned?" "I have learned that waffles are indeed marvels of engineering, that zero gravity makes everything more interesting, that plants are better matchmakers than most sentient species, and that the soft word sweetheart contains more power than any weapon ever devised." Marcus smiled, thinking about the journey that had brought them here, from a frightened alien woman in a medical bay to this moment of perfect contentment among the stars. Any regrets about the whole fake death experience? Only that I did not get to see my people's faces when they realized they had been defeated by the strategic application of human creativity and alien stubbornness. "We should send them a wedding announcement." "An excellent idea. Perhaps with a note explaining that individual consciousness is not a disease, but a gift to be celebrated." "Think they'll listen?" "Probably not. But perhaps someday, when the collective grows tired of efficiency and begins to wonder about the value of choice, they will remember that Zara 7 found something worth dying for among the stars." Marcus pulled her closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit against his side, at how her pointed ears caught the starlight, at how far they'd both come from that first awkward encounter in the medical bay. "I love you, Zara Chen," he said, enjoying the sound of her new name. "I love you too, Marcus Chen," she replied, and in the distance, the plants in the botanical garden hummed a gentle harmony that sounded remarkably like laughter and joy, and the promise of adventures yet to come.